Thank you for joining us, Marilyn Morningstar, and to talk with us about your recently published book, The Last Snapshot. Congratulations.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me here.
We are very interested to find out some details about you. Can you start off with telling us, how long have you been writing?
Well, I've been writing since my early 20s. I guess most of my life I've been writing.
And what got you started writing?
I think I was probably a natural writer in a way. I had a little bit of a questionable childhood, you might say, and then I liked to write. I wrote in a diary as a child, and then when I moved to Las Vegas when I was 19, I worked as a waitress, a cocktail waitress, and I discovered a lot of stories there, like around the poker table, some real characters, very, very well-known characters, as a matter of fact, in these days after like Vegas was published and different things, different movies have been published. But the actual stories themselves and the depth of the things that go on in Las Vegas, that came to me as I worked there for that 2 or 3 year period. And it was quite stunning. And I thought, I wonder if there's any books on this kind of things that are going on here. And I went and I did my research at the library, and there was just at that time just a few books and nothing that actually hit on what I actually was finding out that was happening.
Very interesting. So you have been writing for a long time. And how many books have you finished or almost finished?
I probably have about 30 books that are started. Probably 10 of them are close to being finished. I finished this book, obviously, that's why it's published, The Last Snapshot. Neon Gods was also finished. Well, it took years, but eventually I did get it finished, and I did submit it to Doubleday, and then I got a rejection. And basically they said, you need to pick your story. And I'm like, I don't want to pick my story. I don't know. I love all my characters, you know. So I didn't know what to do. I kind of put it on hold right then and got back to it later.
Right. So you definitely have a lot of stories and story ideas, books that have been started, as well as books that have been finished. That's really impressive. Well, we are here talking, of course, specifically about The Last Snapshot. And this is the first book in your series titled The Age of Force and Neon. Mm-hmm. Can you first tell us a little bit about that title, how you came up with that?
For the series is The Age of Force and Neon. Basically, because I had to break up my stories into 5 different books, because it was rejected by Doubleday, and they told me the word count was too much and you need to pick your story. I basically had to break it up or just throw away some of my characters that I'd lived with quite a long time, and I didn't want to do that. So I ended up having to write the first in chronological order. So it was the mother of the main character, Julia, in Neon Gods. Her mother, Rena, is the main character in The Last Snapshot. The Age of Force and Neon just came to me in kind of a flash. Because, of course, the first book is World War II. Force in every way, in everything you could possibly think of. And then Neon gets into Neon Gods, which takes place in Las Vegas. So Force also has to do with that book. And the Vietnam, which becomes, I think, it comes up in Neon Gods and ends up being one of the 4th or 5th book. Of course, there's Force there again with that war. So we're really covering 2 wars in this series.
Wow, that's quite something. So you mentioned that Neon Gods was the book that you first began writing, yet The Last Snapshot is actually the first in the series. Was that pre-planned?
No, I just broke it up because I had to either throw away half my characters and, quote, pick my story like Doubleday told me to do, or I could break it up into 5 books, which I have to say is extremely hard because each character had their own story in Neon Gods, and it was a completed book. So I had to actually take it apart, character by character, and then create a complete book of that character's experience. And of course, this Rena, who's the mother of Julia, is the key character in The Last Snapshot. And her story goes on for 2 books. So it's the first and the second in the series.
Okay, I see. So it, of course, made sense to make The Last Snapshot be the first in your series, but we see a continuation of your characters into your second book naturally.
Correct. Correct.
So how many years would you say you have been working on this project?
A lifetime? Early 20s, like for a year or 2, and then another 3 years, another 8 years. After that last 8 years of rewriting, I really rewrote the book 8 solid times. I ended up hiring an editor from New York, a very well-known Pace editor, John Payne, who I've credited on the book. And I still didn't sell it. I guess the total amount of those years is probably near 15, at least.
Wow, that's impressive. Well, it sounds like as you were breaking up the years there that you did stop writing for a period of time. Why was that?
Well, life comes by and you have to support yourself and your family, and I got into business. I basically started the artificial nail business that we now know today and call acrylic nails. I was the first one that went around the country teaching people how to do those acrylic nails. Prior to that, I had been a waitress and a cocktail waitress. Then I had that business. That business led me to having a series of franchises, having those stores, my own stores, a nationwide nail supply company, a product company, and then I started the shows. That was the nail shows called Goddess Nail Shows. They're very well known in the industry even still because they were the first 5 or 6 shows a year that I did around the country. 2 in New York, 2 in Las Vegas, 1 in Detroit, and 1 in Hawaii. So that's the business that I sold and eventually was able to buy back my time for a while to get back into writing. So I spent that 3-year period after that in rewriting Neon Gods, and then finding out kind of the end of that 3 years that I really had to break up that book.
So after you sold your convention business, then you spent your time rewriting Neon Gods.
Right.
You mentioned that you attempted to publish it or sell it at that time. And what happened with that?
Well, that is the time that Doubleday told me I had to break up my book. Basically, the word count was too. It was, we don't even know how many pages that was. That would be 2,000 pages or something ridiculous. And I it was a little bit depressing. And then on one hand, and on the other hand, due to a divorce and so forth, I really had to go back to work. So I started another series of conventions, this time in the investment show industry, and they were called the Money Expos, and I had 6 of them. But I got put out of business right after 9/11 because 9/11 hit 1 week before my very first show in that series of conventions, which pretty much slammed me. And I thought, well, I guess this is a message or something. And I just decided, well, here I go. I'm just going to spend my last dime on writing. And I spent the next 8 years writing. And that's how that went.
So when you mentioned Doubleday and you were attempting to publish, were you getting some feedback on why specifically this manuscript was being rejected besides the word count?
Well, yeah, because I realized that I had to get the word count down. And even when I kind of did that and resubmitted, even after that 8 years of working on it, and then I did have my word count down, I was being rejected more on the basis of a lot of World War II books were being submitted to publishers and agents in New York at the time, and they were inundated, as a matter of fact, with them, and they preferred nonfiction over fiction stories. And even though my story is historically accurate to the minute, I mean, I have been to all of the places that are in my book. I have been to Warsaw. I have been all over Poland. I have been to all of the sites of the Holocaust. In my research, not only just dozens of books, dozens and maybe hundreds of books of research in that 8-year period. So it's historically accurate to the minute, but it was still fiction. It wasn't nonfiction, and they were mainly buying nonfiction books, and there was just too many of them. And if they knew it was World War II, they weren't going to just look at it. That's what I was told. So
it was more the topic that at that time they were only wanting the nonfiction variety.
Yeah, and I mean, I can understand they can only publish so many of that particular genre or book, you know, Warsaw or World War II, or, I mean, I realize there's only so much of a market for that, but it hurt.
Sure. And after you received that feedback about World War II, did you continue working on this book? Did you try some other ideas for stories?
Actually, after that 8 years, I kind of got really depressed about it. And I thought, I just looked at my life and I said, you know, do I want to sit here and, because they said, you know, just write another book. Put this one on hold, write another book. You know, you'll get, you know, as soon as you get a name, they'll want that book. And I was like, I can keep writing, which is a sit-down project, which isn't really good for your back, in my case especially. Or I could do the other thing that, you know, I had a lot of goals in my life, and one of them was to travel. And at that point, I was like, I had the money, I had the time, and I thought, you know, it's now or never. So I've been traveling for 10 years, up till very recently, and so I'm still really actually traveling a little bit. And I've been to 60 countries, 7 continents, and I have picked up so many stories and enhanced my life so much. I can highly recommend traveling. I did it on the cheap, hostels and third world countries, a lot of it. But it was a life-changing experience, and I have at least 2 dozen or 3 dozen stories that I picked up along the way. You know, one, for instance, from India, where an Italian girl had gone on a vacation 2 years in a row and woke up on a medical table with them trying to remove her body parts. I have one from Tibet. It's just a fascinating tale, and just the experience of being there and the Chinese government's interest in my interviewing this person and so forth, very extremely interesting. So I have a lot of those stories that are half or more than half written, and so it was worth the 10 years. But I'm back now, kind of, and I was like, well, I better get it, you know, start getting some of these stories finished and published. So that's where I'm kind of here today.
Right. And it sounds like in all those travels, the 2 examples you gave us, as well as numerous others, I'm sure, of characters that you met along the way traveling to all of those various countries. And you have some interesting characters as well in your book, The Last Snapshot. What impact do you feel your characters will have on a reader?
Well, I can't speak for the other stories, but I have to start with Snapshot. You know, my mother always said, I don't know, this is one of her favorite sayings. I don't know why, but it came up a lot, I guess. Man's inhumanity to man. And I've used that term a lot in my life as well, because obviously you see that. And obviously we know about World War II and what happened with the Holocaust, and man's inhumanity to man is certainly, that may be the shining star of it all, although it continues, as we know now, even still today, in places like Yemen, and sad stories everywhere. I just think that humanity has gone too far to be blaming the other and separating us all into little groups and pitting each other against each other. And what I would like people to take away from this story, besides having the personal experience of living those days, like I said, minute to minute, because that's the way I wrote it. I mean, I was those characters when I wrote those. I lived those lives, and I know that that's the response I'm getting from the readers, is that they are inside the heads of the characters, and that's how people learn to feel what it would feel like to be in those situations themselves, and hopefully that increases empathy and compassion in the world. Because if we continue this, the other, and we continue to try to destroy the other, we're just destroying ourselves. We're just destroying the earth. And humanity, we should have humanity, and we should be better than that. So I'm hoping that that's a takeaway, but I think the story is worth reading as a story.
Yes, it sure is. Of course.
Is.
And yeah, I would have to agree that it's going to be hard to walk away from the last snapshot without having at least a smidge more empathy and feeling for our neighbors. So thank you so much for your time and answering these questions. We're very grateful that we had the opportunity to speak with you.
I'm so glad you invited me here tonight. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.